Okay. Hello everyone. I'll present. Can everyone see my screen just fine? You can message in chat, by the way. You don't have to talk in person. Can everyone see? Should like the presentation screen? Yes, sweet. Okay. So I guess who am I and what is GameDev McGill? If anyone doesn't know, GameDev McGill is the only game development club here at McGill, and so we talk about development. Um, and that includes, like, for example, this is going to be an intermediate talk on using techniques in game development, and this is going to be more focused on gameplay or anything related to kind of front of the engine. If you're interested in computer graphics, there's still some things to know, but it's, they're kind of a whole separate field. Like if you take classes like with Professor Cry for computer graphics, that's one of the back end stuff. But I think they had to know all this stuff anyways, so they designed the engine better. And who am I? My name's Samantha Difeo. I'm the lead programmer this year for GameDev McGill. So I organize like getting members in the club. There's someone in the waiting room. Okay. And I've experienced at Square Enix as an intern for gameplay programming, and there I used a lot of this stuff, which is where some of my more professional experience comes from. And I also did some game development at Microsoft over this past summer as an intern, and then I'll be at Ubisoft soon. So, who is our sponsor? Just so happens, it's like hell corporate there, but um, probably I shouldn't say that. Uh, so hopefully it'll be learning more, but a lot of this stuff I think is really important to know as you transition to from beginner to intermediate programming. And it's going to be 1 hour. I don't want to push it any longer. It's going to be from some definitions of different things we're going to be doing and then actually demoing them. So the most important one for me, in my opinion, is JSON and data modeling, object pooling second, and then factory patterns last. Okay. So as I said, what to take out of this, a lot of the things I'll be saying verbally and like going through the code with you. So I'm not going to be writing code by line the code. Instead, I'll be just like talking about it, because if you are going into a medium to large project in the future, you'll be just given something like thousands of files, like thousands truly, and you have to sift through all of them and find your little section and work on that. I'll link in the chat later. A good example of this, Red Alert, was they made their repo public online. It's a game if anyone doesn't know it, and that was it's a lot to look through, but it helps even if you don't want to work on those big teams. If you want to start modding, you have to look at someone else's code as well. So that's a really important concept that a lot of interns have to learn like the first week of their internship or full time, and it's just very overwhelming. And then some common design patterns, the ones I mentioned, and some optimization tips as we go to make sure that, when you're writing that code, you're really know what's the good code and what's, some other sloppy programmer just, not taking it as seriously to make sure your code is good. And I really want to go over data modeling. So does anyone have any questions on like the basic stuff? Just write them in chat and I'll get to them. I have it open on my other screen. Okay, so data modeling is kind of a pseudo definition. Is you have, or I would say before I go into this, if anyone wants to share it in chat, what they think. So you have, let's say you have a designer, right? Like they want to change the different properties of a monster. And so you have a bunch of enemies in your scene, like they're just a bunch of evil monsters. Let's say one of them's a skeleton, one of them's a goblin, whatever. They all have their different abilities and everything else. But for the most part, they're very similar. They have attacking, they have AI, they have whatever you want, movement scripts and stuff. So the designer wants to decide, you have a bunch of waves of enemies, which one, which setup would you do so that the designer can most easily adapt which enemy comes at which point in the wave. So let's say you have 2 waves. In the first wave, you want the goblin to appear, then the monster, then the golem again. In the second one, you want 2 demons to appear. How would you go about doing that? Because the designer will be making that up. And let's say playtesting arrives, and the playtesters find the goblin's way too hard. They should be on the second wave, and he has to switch it later on. It sounds like, oh, you just switch it in code. You just write somewhere, make goblins appear on the second wave, like hard code it or in the inspector. And that's fine for a small scale project. But then if you look at a game, I'm gonna rep hard Assassin's Creed like Valhalla or something. There's these big Viking battles. You can't just do that when you have 100+ enemies happening at the exact same time. It's just very confusing for the designer to figure out like where is which enemy, like how can they see it super quickly. So that's where this solution comes in. So instead you write it out in like a human readable text way. So for non-coders like designers, they don't have to look at your code base. They have no idea how the code works. They just write how they know the setup should be in the data file and replace the file it was there before. So it's just kind of like taking a Google Doc. It says golem, demon, and then you replace it with demon, demon, demon. That's it. They don't know anything else. And what's good about that is, one, I said it's human readable, but also, what was I gonna say? It makes it so that designers don't even have to work with code, what's it called, like version control. They just have to like send that JSON file back and forth. That's it. They don't have to worry about you're working on a piece of code and so are they, and then there's merge conflicts. Like there's none of that, which is very convenient. And if anyone doesn't know JSON, I'll show you it a bit in a second, but the other options are Excel, which has cool functions. That does a lot of complex math, like that's another option. There's database. Database is probably how they're going to use it, so it's all set up on a server somewhere. It's expensive though. It's like databases aren't usually free, and it's a pain to set up, so I'm not going to show that to you, but JSON's just fine for most things. And scriptable objects, if you've ever heard of that, that's a Unity only feature. So I'm not going to teach it because it's so specific to Unity, the engine, and it's also less human readable and understandable for someone outside the project. You have to teach someone what a scriptable object is, where most designers, they should know what a JSON is. Okay, so I'm going to just go into code. All that talking. If anyone have any questions, just let me know. Okay, so let's see. Okay, and I have an old version of this project on GitHub that I'll post. It doesn't have everything, but it'll, at least if you want to follow along without looking at my screen as much. Okay. So it's in chat, by the way. Okay, so here's this monster JSON that I was talking about. So here I have each one of these curly braces is objects. I won't go into JSON too much, but yeah, each one is an object in JSON terms, not a Unity object, just JSON. And let's say I wanted these enemies. Most enemies have some type of health, damage, they have a type of weapon, maybe there's different ones, maybe all golems can do swords and I don't know, guns or something. Like I'll just write a gun here. Yeah, I have the sprite name, which will actually correspond to a sprite, or because I'm doing this in 2D, but it would maybe a name of a prefab or the visuals of it essentially. And so this is one monster. Make that a little bigger. This is a second monster, and then sits here says monster configs. So config is the same as kind of data. It's the configuration you do at the start. So this will, it's just the word choice they use. Sometimes they use the word data. And sometimes you put the unique identifier in here. Sometimes you make it in code. I just put it in here so you could see it. And each one of these is a wave. This is wave configs, like plural. So you know there's one wave and a second wave. So here I'm gonna do a demon, and that's gonna be a golem, and then there's gonna be 2 golems later on. Let me know if anyone hasn't seen JSON, and I'll go a little bit more in depth, but this is just the structure I'm gonna use. And I'm gonna give this example to a designer. And I'm just gonna tell him that he's probably seen JSON before, and he's just gonna make more. He's gonna update these. He might want to add a 3rd enemy in this first wave. It's whatever. It's up to him. But this is very human readable. It's all plain text compared to code. So this is how you would convert it. So there's this is specific. This isn't really specific to Unity. It's a common thing where there's a resource file in Unity. So I'm just going to open my Unity. Oh, I forgot. Unity now, when you switch screens, it likes to reload a lot. So down here in the bottom, there's a resources folder. I just created it. And in here, I have, oh, it's so small. Some little pixel art for a demon and a golem. If I put it in the scene, you'll see it better. They're just PNGs, sprites. And so what this is saying is load the JSON called monster JSON. And then afterwards, it's going to grab the text from that. So JSON, you'll just do it just as a full gigantic string. And then Unity has a built-in system for making, for converting JSON to Unity. I'm using one that people tend to prefer, which is JSON.net. It's a library that allows also to deserialize lists and dictionaries, but it's very similar. So you just write JSON convert.deserialize object. So it takes that big string of that full JSON and it converts it into this object that I've given it. So I have something that when you go through a large project, you'd be like, okay, what the hell is battle config? Like that's, I don't know what that is. I have it mapped to a key, and I really advise that, is you're gonna right click and, oh, by the way, this IDE is called Rider. I bet most of you have not seen it, but it's very similar to Visual Studio's, and I have all the key binding set up to the Visual Studios one, so it looks a little different, but it's all the shortcuts are the same. But I created my own shortcut, because when you go here and you go to declaration or usages, that brings it to where this is declared. Use that all the time. You want to make sure that you see it, everything, like go through all the code, be like, okay, what is battle config? I need to know that. I have that set up to Alt D, so I'm just writing Alt D, and it brings me to battle config. Let's remove this down below. And yeah, so then there's this huge setup here. So like I said, this is going to be converted into all of this. systems are serializable is Unity's way of saying, hey, I'm going to allow this class to be switched between either JSON or maybe something more like bytes and stuff, which is even, how would I say that, like even more like serialized, just for faster movement between things, especially if you want to store stuff on the server. And then there's battle config and has a list of waves. Then you go to wave. Wave has an ID and a list of monsters, and the monster has all its specific monster stuff. So then when I go into here, so this is going to trickle down. It's going to be like, oh, what's a wave config, and then set it up. So this thing is actually a bunch of different types of objects. You can set it up that way, which is really nice. So then you don't have to have one JSON equals one whole class. That's just, it'll be super messy. Your class will have no encapsulation at all. This is a better setup. And I believe the Unity built-in JSON utility, it also does this. There's also, if you want to not sterilize something, right here about serialized field, you can do non-serializable, non-serialized, I think, and like private int or whatever. And these are the two different ways you can get it from JSON. You can either do it from a public or a sterilized field private. That means I still want it to be sterilizable, but I'm going to hide it from all the other classes. That's my preferred way of doing it, but for this example, I'm going to show you that it has to be public for these normally, because these are just kind of holders. So if I go back to JSON converter, I'm returning this. So I'm returning a battle config, and really all the logic is going to be elsewhere. One thing that big code bases do is they make sure that this is data, then there's a whole nother class for logic. That keeps it very separated. And then someone asked in chat, could you technically use both scriptable objects and JSON? Would that be unnecessary? It's not unnecessary. It depends on what use you want to have. So if I would stay away from scriptable objects if your designer has never seen them before. But if you want to do things that they aren't going to touch and you're going to as a programmer, like for sure, do scriptable objects on those parts. And I believe scriptable objects, you can have logic to them, which is better than JSON in that sense, but it's specific to Unity. So if you want people to mod your game, make sure that anything in scriptable objects is not something you want the modders to change, because it's just harder for them. I think at Square Enix we had half and half, because we were like in the middle of development and it was faster for us to do scriptable objects. And then later on, when we were set on the data model we chose, we went full JSON and then database. Because like this doesn't come out of nowhere. Like I made this up in my head. And as a gameplay programmer, you'll be making this up with the designer. You'll go through a revision, you'll say like, hey, I know that these are the things you might want to change. This is my setup I have. How do you like it? And they just like talk to you back and they're like, okay, like I think that's good. By the way, I also want this in there, or I think it's a little clustered. Like they'll let you know. And also as you're designing, you might add more stuff to this because you're just learning to do new stuff. But eventually the JSON will be kind of set in stone. Okay, so where is this actually called? So this is the static class as well. Static classes are different than singletons because it's not a single instance of this. I can make more of these if I wanted, but everything here is not specific to the implementation of the instance, because this load battle config, like you can do this anywhere. Like there's no instance property. It's just there's one JSON, you load it, and that's it. So static is a little bit better. I think everyone's seen static with JSON. I'm sorry, not JSON, JavaScript. No, Java. Sorry, there's just so many J words. Java use static a lot when you write it. And what else was I gonna say? Oh, also note here, I don't have mono behavior. You'll have different things. I don't remember what it is in Unreal, but like it'll say like this can be a component essentially. Like, so if I go, but it doesn't have to be, like, this isn't going to be a component anymore. If I go to Unity and I try to go into one of my little things, add component, and I go JSON converter, it doesn't show up. I know this is small, but yeah, it just doesn't show up for you. Because I don't want someone to make this into a component. It should just be called by other classes. So up here I have one usage, and I'm going to click and find the usage. I use this a lot. It's a similar thing in Visual Studios if you have the Pro Edition, which I think students have, and your company would have if you work somewhere. So if you switch here, you can see, you can instantly go switch back and forth. And okay, so it's being called here. So Battle Manager, you're gonna have a bunch of managers, but I promise they're not gonna be these god classes, which is a huge issue that a lot of people do, is they have a ton of stuff in a manager class. But if you split up to multiple managers, it's not a problem. Like if a battle's not a big part of my game, we're gonna have a battle manager. But I'm still gonna have a combat manager, which deals with the fighting, like the physical, like that sword versus gun stuff. Then there's going to be one for AI. There's going to be one for like maybe like just character NPC movement AI. There's going to be your character controller. There's a bunch of different ones. So it says manager, but it's not like this all-encompassing class. Okay, and then going through the code, I'm going to ignore the delegate for a second. So here I just want to highlight, why is this like this? It's really ugly. Okay. All right, so here I have battle config equals that JSON converter, the class, because it's static, dot load battle config. And then here it shows that it's private and it just stores it. So it's just storing the config somewhere and it's going to use it wherever it wants inside this class. So for example, where we're going to use it is, yeah, down here. When I say code, keycode.g, so when you press the G button, you're going to instantiate a monster. Ignore this for a second, we'll go over it in the object pooling. And then you're going to go sprite equals resources.load a sprite. And I'm going to find it based off of whatever wave we're currently on. There's a little index somewhere. Then what monster we're currently at that hasn't been killed yet, and then do sprite name. So remember, sprite name was here. So all I'm doing is wave config, which index of monster, sprite name, and I'm going to get it here. So, oops, where is it? So this is just getting the sprite of the next monster to instantiate. And then I do monster.get component sprite render dot sprite equals sprite. Now when I say monster, it's great because it's truly a monster. It's not a golem or a demon. It's just a monster. I don't have to worry about what all this implementation is. If another programmer reads this, they don't have to be like, oh, what's a golem? Like maybe they don't know what it is. It's just monster. You know that, and that's like it keeps it very high level. Also use var a lot. I think like auto and stuff as well in C++. Get used to them doing that. But if you highlight over this, it'll tell you the type. So don't worry too much. All the time I'll look at a var, I'll be like, what the hell is this? And then I'll say here, monster. Okay. And notice how I have no comments in this file, because most programmers will not comment their code in real life. It's really frustrating, but like, that's what they do. So I don't agree to it. So I have comments in the other ones, but just showing it, like it's a mess sometimes. And you just have to dig your way through. So next thing we're going to dig our way through is, what is this? Like here I'm saying, oh, look, I have a monster. I'm grabbing it from monsterpool.get prefab instance. Like, I don't really know what that is. So I'm going to Alt-D, which is the setup I had for go to definition. And it brings me to this gigantic class generic object pool. And it's like, great, I have to read all of this. Awesome. But really just, if you've seen what object pool is once, then you'd be like, oh, it's just an object pool setup. I know what this is, it's fine. That's where design patterns come really in handy. So does anyone have any questions on data modeling? Because then I'll switch over to object pooling. Yes, no, maybe so. If anyone has questions, ask in chat. Okay, object pooling in gaming is how it might seem really weird at first, but you instantiate a bunch of objects, and that slows down the computer really rapidly. Say for instance, you have bullets and you're shooting in a first-person shooter. You have to instantiate all these bullets. It really, really slows your computer down. Instantiation is a slow task. It has to like set up all the components. It has to set up the visuals, everything else. Like it's just really slow. And you have many bullets at once. Usually you just kind of like semi-automatic shoot crazy. How are you gonna deal with that in a first-person shooter where speed is everything? So object pooling is kind of that solution. You hide a bunch of pre-instantiated game objects in the scene. So like you have a flat terrain, let's say, underneath the ground where viewers cannot see, it's just a shit ton of bullets hidden. Like it's weird, but like that's actually like if you look in the game, like a lot of times they'll have that. They'll either like drop the position to below the terrain, or maybe they'll disable the visuals. Like there's a couple different ways to hide it, but that's a common one. Like there's so much weird stuff. If you were able to access the camera of the player and like look around, you would see like a lot of weird stuff because it's essentially just like a stockpile behind the scenes. And it's only for things that you use a lot. So we're going to use it with the enemies because let's say we're going to have this like gigantic horde of enemies. Station's a big procedure. Okay, so inside the pool, we'll say it's underground. You have 3 demons that you set up. And then in the scene, there's nothing. But then at battle time, you take one to the scene because you want to start the battle. And then mid-battle, you have all of them out, let's say. You just happen to be using them. And you want more. Okay, well, you only instantiated 3 at the start. Like, how do you do that? Well, you do indeed the pool check and be like, I have no extra ones. So it instantiates a new one, which does slow things down a bit, but just make sure that your pool size like is roughly the size you want. So it creates a new one and it'll add it also to the scene. Then in the end of the battle, you put it back in the pool. You're going to have another battle soon. If you're not, then you just delete everything. But otherwise, like you just shove it back into the pool and it'll be ready for the next battle. Okay, so that's what this big ugly class is. I'll increase the size. Okay, and the base code I got from here. So if you want to look at it, I dropped the GitHub link in the chat earlier. Okay, so here it's generic because let's say I want to make a monster object pool and someone on my 100-person programmer team wants to make a bullet object pool. All of a sudden you have 2 different ways of making the same design pattern. There's little differences. Maybe they don't call this prefab, they call it something slightly different. It just becomes a mess. So just make a generic one. Generics are like templates, if anyone's seen templates instead. And so then you don't have to specify what it is. So monster or bullet is T. So this is saying it's a type of object pool. And T is, both of these can be components. T is poolable. So it's a monster we'll say is poolable. And so I have a reference to the prefab, monster prefab. This is just, let's see, how would I describe this? I would just show it to you. Oh, here. So it's a prefab or like a saved object where it has a sprite renderer. Remember earlier we set the sprite, so if I just set this to daemon, it's going to show up here as a daemon. And that's going to be configured with the paddle config we did earlier. As a rigid body, it has a monster script, which controls the logic of a monster. Before we were doing monster config, which has to do with the data only. And then it has a collider, just like anything you need for a monster. So this is the prefab we'd be using in this case. So discard changes. If I go to a little game object that I have in the scene, I have a monster pool, and I write prefab is that generic one. And then the starting pool size is going to be 5, so that's how many you instantiate on start. I just set that to 5. I don't know. Depends on what you're making. And then we're going to be using a stack. You can use a list or a queue or whatever, but a stack does, when you remove it from the pool, a stack removes it and gives it to you in one step. Or I don't think listed. I don't think so. But it just has like a very unique feature where it's called push and pop instead of add and remove. But it's not really important. It's just the one I think they use. They tend to use queues too. So this is the actual pool itself. On awake, you instantiate all the ones based off the size. So just loop through that size 1 through 5. And then I'll go over this in a second. It resets their transform. So this will reset it to like underneath where you're hiding it. I'll do Alt D. It's going to bring me down, and see here, all it does is local position equals 0, scale equals 1. That's all it does. Okay, so then I'm going to set it active to false just to be extra cautious. And then I'm going to push it onto the pool. So it's inside the stack now. And now we're going into the function that we saw earlier, which is get prefab instance. So this is grabbing a single one. It's like, I want to use a monster right now. It's like, okay, if the pool has more than something already in it, like it has stuff in there, pop it. You don't have to reset the transform, but you grab it and you turn it. Else you instantiate it, which is expanded. You set it active to true. I'm going to go over that one in a second, and then you prepare for use. Maybe there's some special things. Maybe there's a start animation. So when it first appears, it like kind of grows like this monster, like it's a zombie and it grows out of the ground or something. And you can make that special to the instance. So it has its own functionality, trying to make this stay as generic as possible. And then there's return to pool, which is you have a monster instance, you set it to active, you hide it back in the ground, and you put it back in the pool. So this is clearing it back instead of destroying. So do not destroy or instantiate on your own. Just do this. Okay. And yeah, and then this one, you'll sometimes see this stuff where if it's not T, so T is monster, let's say it's a derived class like demon, it's going to say like, hey, can it be, is its base class monster? If so, go into this function. Otherwise, say like, hey, this is a bullet. What the hell are you using this monster pool for? So debug log error is really nice. There's equivalents in any language. So debug dot, that means it's only going to be done when debugging a game, which is really important because when you're making a game, you're going to be testing a lot. And once you go to ship that game, there's so many things in a big game, like so many tiny little details. You might not realize that like you like print to the screen or something, and like then they see it in the build at the end, and then like players are like, what the hell? Like there's a string that's just like popping up on my screen, like, or maybe the error messages just don't make sense. They only make sense to programmers, so it's not really good. So this one's only for development. So if you go to the build settings for Unity, you just check this or not. So when you build this executable, on the bottom right, it'll say like, this is for development only. And it'll show those debug logs, which is great. Let's see. Okay, so also I want to mention these comments. If anyone hasn't seen this before, it's just summaries. So when you highlight over this, it says it here, returns instance to the pool. Additional check its correct type, which is what I wrote here. Some people over comment like this, while other people don't comment. When you do this, I hate it because it's like 4 lines here. You're like constantly scrolling to see everything. It's annoying. But sometimes you'll see companies with like a whole crazy code like this or comments like that. And let me know if anyone has any questions on this. I think this is like the hardest part of the coding because generics are just something you have to get used to over time. But yeah, so then I'm going to go into all this stuff. So here is I object pool and I poolable. Let's see. Alt D to go to the where it's from, and it's an interface, which everyone should know, and return to pool. So this is just saying you want to make another pool, like let's say someone does, like they better at least have a return to pool, so you know that they're doing this function. So at least all the names are the same and things like that if they want to do something besides this. Then iPoolable is an interface making sure that you want to have like that you have this like prepared to use because it's called a generic object pool. And it's specific to that T, the monster or bullet. So that's great because like I'm gonna right click and do find usages. There's only one, so it's not going to show me. Sometimes on the bottom I'll have like multiple, but it's going to pop me to the only one there is. Yeah, it's down here, prepare to use, but let's see. So this is on the object itself. How do you know that? It says 2 usages right here. Actually, I'll right click, find usages. And it says, okay, there's a usage in monster. I'm like, okay, cool. So I look in here and prepare to use. I'm like, oh, okay, so it's the object itself that has this iPoolable. That makes sense. So this is the pooled object itself. So it's of type iPoolable. It does this, what's it called? It overrides this, kind of. It's, from an interface, sorry. And it's going to tell me what it wants to do. So here it knows which pool it goes back to. That's all that origin was. Because there's going to be multiple pools. This is not a singleton, generic object pool, or like a single instance of the class. It's this one that it wants to know, okay, this like, so when you look at this at runtime, it's going to say, oh, iObject pool, this is the monster pool versus the bullet pool. So it's just telling itself, hey, return me back to the monsters pool specifically. And then all this stuff is normal Unity stuff, so I won't go over it. It's just for visual effects. But this is just movement. I'm just updating the velocity. So, I mean, yeah, so it's just moving the object over time, something chill. And then I have a despawn trigger, which once you collide with this, it's going to return to pool. So it's going to call its own function, return to pool. Then it's going to go find its reference to the pool and call it. Maybe it wants to do something else. Maybe it wants to do an on-death animation or something as well. So I want to keep this as a function. And that way that every time you want to return to pool, you're not going to do origin.return to pool because you want to make sure everything's the same every time. So you're going to do like, to do death animation or whatever. This way, if you want to add something else underneath here, another to do, you can just add it in this function. You don't have to do every time someone wants to destroy, you have to add those 2 lines. Like, yeah, of course, it's the purpose of a function, But make sure you're doing that often when you're working with other programmers, because otherwise you're gonna have to be changing a lot of their code or hunt down their code. So keep a lot of things in little functions. Okay, so now it's like, okay, well, what the hell is this battle manager dot monster destroy this? Okay, so you Alt D. It's like, oh, cool. What is this? So this is another design pattern, which is observer pattern, I guess you would say. And I won't go over what delegates are. They're C# only, I think. But you'll have an event system in your project if you're working on a big one, or you'll create it. And that just means that this is an event called on monster damage, and it tells you what monster was damaged. I wrote destroyed, but let's say just damaged. It's public static, so it can be referenced anywhere. And this is just an event, essentially. So you say, so every time the monster was damaged, let's say you have like a private void health decrease or attacked, like let's say it was attacked, you would write in here on monster damage dot or you just write this. It's called monster destroy. So I just call it. Sometimes it wants to invoke. Yeah. It's just the weird extra syntax. I don't have the monster type, but this classify. Yeah, whatever. I need a monster to go in here. So let's say like monster attacked monster, right? And you just shove it in real fast. So you're saying I'm broadcasting to the world this monster was attacked or destroyed or damaged or whatever. Sometimes you even put in here like the damaged amount, let's say like 10. And then they can, maybe the health UI can decrease by 10, the monster's little health UI at the top. Whatever you want to do for it. So that's also kind of data modeling in a way. You have to set up what happens when they get damaged. But here it broadcasts it to any other class. So in this one, so I right click, find usages, and I have a usage right here, which is this line. It says, okay, the equal sign, like ignore that, that's just like added to the event, essentially like a function. So when I do the invoke, it's going to call this lambda expression. If you haven't seen lambda expressions, this is an example of it, I guess. This is a function right here, this part. So it has parameter monster to destroy. Also, lambda expressions are now in C++, which is great. We use them all the time. I think it's like a newer feature. I actually had that question on a full-time interview question. They're like, what's the newest, best C++ feature in your opinion? I was just like, shit, like I didn't know, like I don't remember what I said, but I remember he's like, oh, like I would say lambda expressions. Okay, oh, okay. So yeah, I don't know, weird fun fact. I got that twice, honestly, I don't know why. So all it is a function without a name, because you're only going to use it in line, like here. Let's say you only use it once. So here I have it set up so it's going to save this function. It's kind of like function pointers as well, delegates. And it's going to say, okay, how many wave monsters to kill? This is saying the current wave you're in, if it's over the count of how many monsters there is, set it back to 0, otherwise wave monsters kill ++. So that's just saying, you know, it's moving on to the next wave, or it's going to increment within its wave. This is a ternary operator, so it's kind of dense looking, but I just wanted to show something that's kind of uglier code, but you'll see often. So I'll just comment here, lambda expression. So yeah, like this is still lambda expression if you go like ++, because like this is the body of the function. Yeah. know some people have seen some of this stuff and some haven't. I just want to like go through all of it because I know like lambda expressions doesn't come up until if you go to McGill 302 or something, the class. Yeah, so let's look at the other implementation of monster destroy. I have it here on trigger enter. So when it collides with another object, you're just going to call it saying, hey, it collided with the object that destroys it. So I'm going to call this, and now any function that uses it will. So when you do this, this is the same as that invoke. This, by the way, is, if you look up here, of class monster. So it's just saying like, I'm the monster that got destroyed. And then it calls this function in any other function. Let's say I want another one down here, like monster destroy plus equals, I don't know if you can do update, but like it would be something like this. Another function reference to call every time you broadcast it. I know I went over that a little funky. I've talked about it in other lectures a little bit better, but or talks, but yeah, it's just a side thing because it is more Unity only. So someone said in chat, how those, how do they work syntactically? The input of the lambda is monster to destroy, but when is it used? When is it used? Like when is it called? I think you're saying. Yeah. Okay, so I'll go back to this. This is just a function. So that's equivalent to me writing here private void my func, and then just copying pasting this right here. The arrows turn into normal function brackets like that. So this is equivalent. So if I go here and I just change this monster, like I'll just like, I think I write it like that. It's the same thing, saying, hey, like, does that make sense at least? I know there's another part you're asking, but does that make sense that they're the same thing? Maybe. Yes. No, monster to destroy is not a function. It calls other functions. So it's like you take, if I go to my wonderful paint. So let's say you have, what is this called? I'm gonna do lambda, like the literal symbol. So it has a reference to a bunch of functions. So my func was one of them. And let's say a bunch of other ones. Let's say like A and B. When you do lambda, oh, I'm sorry. What am I thinking? This is not lambda. This is, there's kind of two things here. So I just wanted to say both and I just confused them in my head. Who is this again? Okay. So this is not a lambda. This is the delegate that I was talking about. So D for delegate. This time it's called monster destroy. When you do D parentheses or D.invoke, they're the same exact thing. You're calling all of these functions. All it does is point to other functions, it stores them and calls all of them at once. It's an event, like it's a big event. All these functions, no matter what class they're in, they're going to be called. So in this case, when I do monster destroy equals, all it is setting it. So it's saying D, it makes this arrow my func. So then when I go into here and I do dot monster destroy, it's calling this and any other function attached to it. Does that make more sense? Well, lambda expression is just a function. So yeah, this is just a function. I just did a lambda one because it's what you'll commonly see with delegates or events. It's a one-use function. So two nasty ideas all at once. Other things, like I said before, that you want to use for the delegate is, let's say you got attacked and you lower your damage. You want also to update the UI. You want to see if it was destroyed, if the health is less than 0. If it is, put it back into the pool or destroy it, depending on if you have a pool or not. There's a bunch of different things. Maybe you want to do a death animation. That could be in an animation controller class. So then it keeps all the encapsulations in other areas. So you don't have to have one function that says, oh, if health is less than 0, start the death animation, destroy the game object, or return it to the pool. Like, it doesn't have to do all that stuff. It just calls the event saying, hey, this is going to happen, and everyone else deals with it on their own problems. So then you don't have to have this gigantic godlike class that has access to the animation controller, that has access to the object pool. Like, it keeps everything very separated. And lambda expressions are just lazy programmer techniques. That's kind of really it. I don't really think there's in C++, you'll see it a lot with the sort function, because you can pass a function in as a parameter, which is really cool, which I don't think you can do in C#, but this is a similar idea. I don't know, I forget if you can. Okay. And we have about 5 minutes left, so I'll just keep going. I just want to show this in action. So here, remember, we go back to where this whole object pool situation came from. It was get prefab instance. What the hell was that? So we have access to the monster pool, which I have access to right here. So all I did was I created an empty object, called it battle manager, and I grab access to the monster pool. So I'm going to make a monster pool. And then I'm just going to reference it. You have to drag it this way, which is kind of weird, but yeah, it's essentially grabbing this component. Then I'm going to grab the prefab I want, which is this generic monster, and my starting pool size. So let's say it's 10. So I did that already up here. So I'm going to delete this one because it's not necessary. So you can have other monster pools, which is great. You can have bullet pools, whatever other pools, monster pools, and then you can have more monster pools and more bullet pools. Like, you can have whatever you want. Maybe it's a different scene or whatever. So that's what's so great about the generic setup. Okay, so now I'm going to play it and show you what happens. So this is a little portal that someone made. So it's just a cute little animation. That's it's Jack, Jack Shia, not the other Jack, in chat. And yeah, he makes pixel art, so I just wanted to rep. If you press G, that was my input for instantiation. Okay, looks like there's a demon. And then if you look over here, it hit my despawn trigger and destroyed it. Now it should be back in the pool. So here's my pool objects. They're hidden. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they're actually hidden in the same location because I was lazy, but like, they're here. They're just hidden. You can put them underground though, but now I press G again, and I'm going to pause. And now you see one was instantiated, and it's going to start moving and doing its thing. And then once it hits the edge, it's going to hit this trigger that I set up, and it's going to disappear back into the pool. So it's constantly reusing these clones. So now I have a bunch of these demons. So I think this one I set up to be all demons, but like, you would sometimes have constant demons, like a golem here or something. So maybe I set that up wrong. Let's see. I'm gonna put this here, ++, and see if that changes anything. does not. Let's see. Let me know if anyone finds this thing. Let's see, spray. What did I name it here? Demon, then golem. Okay. You know what I can do? I can go here and then always use the debugger. This debugger is slightly weirder because it's wider, but you just press this little bug. Then press play. And try to use the debugger unless you're in update without like something like you have to press G. Like if you're in update and you're just spamming something all the time in update, you can do like debug.printlog or debug.log, whatever the print statement is called. I really advise that for update because then you can just see how it changes over time. But try to use the debugger way more. Get comfortable with your IDE's debugger. There's also called watching variables, which a lot of people don't know. Which you can watch a specific variable about how it changes on the side, kind of like MATLAB if you've ever seen it in MATLAB. I really advise looking into how to do that on your IDE, like Visual Studios. Why is this busy? It's really important. There's also one for C++ where you can see where things are referenced, like in the backend, like in like the actual registries and stuff. If you want to get really low level. Oh wow, this does not like this. I think it's just because I'm running it while screen sharing. You can do it. Okay, well in the meantime, I'll go over factory pattern, which I won't actually do the code for. I just want to show it because the code you've actually seen probably before. So factory pattern is probably the most, if anyone has any other questions, type them in chat, but I'll just go over this real quickly. Say you have a few predefined types of an object or component. You want to make it so that other programmers don't have to deal with that information. So before, if you saw everywhere, I named everything monster. I didn't name it golem or demon because you don't want them to have to care. Let's say you want them all to attack at once. Then you can move through all the monsters and do monster.attack. You can't do that if they're of type golem, of type demon. You have to do the base class, which is monster. I think people have heard of that for like polymorphism. That's what factory pattern is good for in one way, but also a little more advanced. It's you don't want them to have to deal with the constructors of all the different ones. That makes it so they don't. If you want to change that constructor in the future, you want to add little code bits here and there. It's not going to change when they call it. There's no extra stuff they have to add. You know, maybe you have like another parameter or whatever, but they don't have to know much about it. Like hide as many parameters as possible, make sure they don't have access to a lot of different changes. And if there's any issues with instantiating a monster of any type, it's all in the factory class, which is really nice. So here's an example for magical abilities. Let's say you have frost, fire, teleport ability. You have ability, fire ability equals new fire ability. You have to find this class and you have to find all the other type of classes, frost and teleport. Maybe you don't know all of them, so it's really frustrating. Otherwise, you can actually just go into this factory class and it'll list them all out, which is great. So that's what it would happen here. So it's ability factory. It's just a class and all it has is a function called build ability. And you type in either an enum or a string saying, I want to build a fire one. It's going to output an ability. This also prevents them from seeing, it's called like a wrapper in a way. It prevents them to be able to make this a fire ability on the left-hand side. So then it's always the base class, which is what you want in these situations usually, unless there's something specific. But you know, fire has an attack ability. It's going to puff out something different than frost one, but we'll just generalize it, call it attack. That way, you never had to memorize all these different function names that are slightly different because every programmer decided to name them differently. Like it ignores that. There's also an even more advanced way to use factory pattern, which is talked about here. Kenny's answer to this one, so Kevin's, I mean, so just look up who that was on there. Now, wow, it just does not want to start. That's fine. But yeah, it's probably just my like plus equals thing. Oh man, I hate when it's like ready to set up and then it disappears. But yeah, factory pattern is the most common one. It's really something you've seen before. What? Did it not want to close? Yeah, but yeah, it was just like a plus plus. It worked on the build that I have on GitHub, so it's fine. So you've seen factory pattern before. Don't worry, you will be using base and drive classes. There is going to be a fire ability somewhere, but it's going to be a class like, if I duplicate this slide, actually, screw that. It's going to be a class that looks like class factory, ability factory. Then you're going to have build, oops, public void build ability. And then you're going to do string type. And then you're going to, this is the more naive way to do it, is switch over the type and a switch statement, so just kind of like if statements, case type equals fire. And then if that's the one, you do return new fire ability. And maybe you have other stuff up here. Maybe there's something else to it. Maybe there's a charge the player has to use, monster dart dot charge ability, or maybe that's above. Like maybe actually no, just return it and it'll deal the other function. You would actually call this information, but oh sorry, it's not public void. It would be ability. I don't have this stuff set up, but it's just because it's very simple. You just switch through them. Another type of way which I thought was really cool is reflection. Reflection is more advanced, so I don't want to go over it in the end. But essentially, what reflection is you can access information about, like you can say, find all classes in your project that are derived from an ability class. You can do that. It's a actual thing. It just searches through all the files and stuff. It's really slow, so try to do it only at the beginning and then store that information somewhere. But yeah, you can do that. You can do that, and then you know, there's a function called like dot subclass of. So let's see. I forget what it's called. Oh, I don't have the reflection stuff up here, but project already open. Give me 1 second. It'll be super fast. Spawn it. Yeah, okay, so I have this in Visual Studios. So this is an example of that, and I won't go into it more than just showing it to you. Does it not make it bigger? Okay. So here's a monster factory instead, and you have a dictionary of strings, so that's like fire, frost, whatever. So in this case, it'd be like demon, golem, whatever, and the actual type. So a type would be like a class type or something. So what this does is assembly.getAssembly. So this is getting all that information in your files, and it's type of monster. And I don't want any monster classes that are abstract. I want them to be subclasses of monster too. So I don't want the monster class, perhaps, if monster is an interface or an abstract class. I want all the sub ones like golem and everything like that. So this is an added feature you would add. And then for each one that the assembly found, you're going to create an instance of it and add it there. So create an instance. It's kind of cool. Like it creates monsters by type. It's going to just like have a reference to that type, which is the derived classes. And you do this once. You instantiate the factory, and then you would get the monster based off of. So get monster is the same as build monster, whatever. And then you search through the different types. Let's say, and then you try to find it based off of that string. So this would be saying the equivalent to saying, hey, is there a dictionary out there? Is one of the keys golem? If there is, it gives me the type golem, the class golem. And then I would instantiate however I want. So I'd do like monster equals instantiate, or I'd do the object pooling, instantiate monster type. Yeah, it'd be something like that. It just depends on how you implement it, but I didn't want to go over it more than just these quick seconds because reflection's a little funky, and I just wanted to show it in the code. So this exists if you ever want to use it in the future, and it's a cool way to make your factory pattern like super fancy. So then when you do this for each loop, you don't have to do all that switch statement stuff. Instead, it's a dictionary, and that's all predefined. So you know if you have the key or not. There's no like adding more switch statements or anything. If you add more subclasses, you don't have to change this code at all. Every time on start, it's going to run this git assembly and it's going to find it for you. It saves a lot of like updating every time you want to change it. Because let's say the designer wanted to add a monster, and then no, I don't actually want a golem. They're all going to be other monsters. It's like, oh, so this helps with that. And this was from this idea of using reflection is from a really nice programmer, Jason Weeman, online. So I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but yeah, so you can find that information elsewhere. Let's see. Okay, so that's everything. It's definitely a way more advanced tutorial because I'm not coding it myself. But if anyone has any more questions, like just unmute or type in chat. I'll gladly go over it. Anything you want more in detail or anything at this point. Questions? Okay. If no one has any more questions, if you're not part of the club, you can message me gamedev.tech@mcgill.eus.ca. Let's see, 40 or something. You can message me here. If you know my Discord, I'm Sam Difeo on there, or Fasten, if you see that name, that's my gamer tag. I'll gladly go over things in more detail. You have the code on GitHub for especially the object pool, which is a little more advanced. So you can go through that if you want, or it's all like, I'm totally cool with if everyone wants to copy that in the future. I got part of it from a tutorial, so it's referenced at the top, but other than that, like totally use it, reuse it for projects if you ever want to. It is for more middle to large size projects, because do you really need a generic object pool if you're making a tiny game? Like probably not. But if you're going farther than that, like once your code gets bigger and bigger, you'll like realize you really need to have these things. So yeah, so just depending on what you're doing. And I guess further on, if you want to look into any other advanced techniques, I would really look into doing them in C++ as well. Like maybe do it in C# once, because it's an easier language to work with, in my opinion. And then try it in C++, like just copy the code and figure it out, just to get comfortable because it is the language more used in game development. And then lastly, what other design pattern that I think is most important is state pattern. I didn't go over it here, but it's super common. It's really important to transition from different states. Let's say you want to go from attacking to just guarding. It's used a lot in AI, so I think Lancer will also go over that a bit. We'll have a talk with Lancer to be determined next week. He's another associate programmer on GameDev McGill, and he's going to go over a lot of cool AI stuff. So he'll be going over things like, you know, the NPC is attacking you, then it's going to be guarding the area. Then let's say like it's just going to be like just standing there like doing something. Maybe it grabs a drink of coffee, does that little animation. It's going to go between different states. And what's good about states is there's interrupts. So you're drinking your coffee animation and someone shoots you. You're not going to sit and continue to drink your coffee until the animation's over and then attack them. Like you're going to be instantly interrupted. You need a function called interrupt that deals with, I'm interrupted. Okay, cool. If I'm in the coffee state, cut my animation, or like any state, cut my animation and instantly go to the next one. Maybe have like a weird transition, like some way to make it transition more smoothly. But that allows for more like interruptive sort of behavior. Or maybe you're attacking and you want to go to the coffee state, so you're like, nah. So like there's different little things. There's interrupt, there's just generally switch state, which is less intense. There's a bunch of little things like that are a great way to use state. And it's so commonly out there online that I didn't go over it because they have more examples for state patterns than these two. So yeah, but that's where I'd go to next. All right, and I'm gonna end my talk here then. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to post in chat again the presentation for anyone who came in a little bit later. Thanks, guys.